This is Damian Macy as part of the Friends of the Marshall Public Library Project, recording oral histories. And today I'm fortunate to have with us Connie Wieck, and it is August the 7th of 2015, and she is home from a wonderful, unusual place called China. Connie is from Marshall. She went to school here, but has taken off after that and is really spending most of her time now on the other side of the globe. So with that, I'll introduce you to Connie.
Oh, thank you, Damien. We'll just start off with where I was born in Terre Haute, Indiana, but always grew up in Marshall, Illinois. And my parents were teachers at the Marshall High School and elementary school as well, Bill and Priscilla Wieck. And so I grew up in a teaching family. And I also am a teacher, although I didn't plan to become a teacher. I wanted to be an archaeologist when I was going to grow up. I was going to be an archaeologist, and I was going to dig up Roman ruins and all of those amazing things. And I actually went to a dig in Tunisia after I graduated from high school, because that's what I was going to do. And I went on a dig for 2 weeks and dug in the dirt and was filthy dirty and learned that I don't want to do that for the rest of my life. So then I changed into teaching because I was good at English. And then I went to Eastern Illinois University, where I received a BA in English with a teaching certification for secondary education. And then I went to Japan with the United Methodist Church on a short-term mission stint, I guess you could say. And then it kind of went on from there, and that's how I ended up in China, actually. But we'll come back to that a little later.
Connie, was there something in school or an individual who just kind of steered you towards the idea of archaeology that really kind of influenced you, maybe?
That's a good question. It was probably my interest in Latin, which had to do with Mrs. McNary, Kathleen McNary, and she was our Latin teacher at that point. And those are I believe that was the only language we had in school at that time. I think there was Spanish, but I'm not quite sure, because that would have been 1980 to 80, or 79 to 83 when I was in high school. And I just got really drawn into the classics, and I had Mrs. McNary as a teacher. I just thought Roman ruins were the coolest things in the world, and people wearing togas and everything. And I really enjoyed learning another language, and I thought, this is neat. I want to be able to speak another language fluently. But of course, you know, Latin is not a language that we use often unless you're in the Catholic Church. So that's where I got the interest in archaeology.
Did you ever go to a place like Pompeii or Herculaneum?
Well, the archaeological dig was in Carthage. Mm-hmm. And of course, the Aeneid is all based upon Carthage. And we dug around a racetrack there. And I joined an archaeologist who was out of Michigan, a professor in Michigan, and he would take these 3-month digging expeditions to this particular place in near Carthage, or what was at one time Carthage. And so we dug up a little corner of a racetrack. I loved the fact that I found things. I dug up a skeleton. I found a purse of Roman coins. I found some dye, dice dye, that they used in, around the racetrack when they were betting.
That sounds really exciting.
It was exciting. And then I found a very unique, what was it? A very unique piece of not pottery, I don't know, plaque, I guess, and it had the Roman racetrack picture on it. And that was one of the biggest finds of the summer, according to the archaeologist. What was his? I can't remember his name. But, so that was very excited about that. But it was filthy dirty, and it is Africa, and we were hot. And our workers were in their Ramadan festival, their season. So they were not eating during the day, and they were very, very tired. They were exhausted. And then they were staying up all night eating because, that's their culture and also their religion. And I remember some of the archaeologists who were in charge of the site were not happy about that, and were always telling them that they were lazy. And I did not think that that was very appropriate from a cultural standpoint. And I think that's probably the first time I realized when you live in another country and you're working with people of another culture, you have to be aware of their customs and their feelings too. And I think that's probably where I started to think, that is not an appropriate way for an American to act. So that's where it kind of instilled in me that when I ever go to another country, I need to be aware of what, people are.
Connie, all those things that you found, did they end up in a museum somewhere, or do you know where they are?
Yes, they did. We had there was this little museum that our archaeological founder, he created, and I believe it is still there. And he even told me, like, several years later, that my find was there in a place of prominence right there in the museum. But that racetrack that it was a huge, gigantic racetrack. It was one of the biggest racetracks of the Roman Empire, and it's now built over, and all the mosaics are gone, and they no longer take digs there because there's just nothing there to dig up, and the people took over. But that's just how anything is. You build on top of what other people have built on, and you tear things down. And it is a little sad, but that's just the way the world works. So each civilization takes over from another. But I did learn that that's not what I want to do for the rest of my life. So the teaching was, much better. And that's also, I think, the time that I thought that, I kind of want to do something overseas, but I wasn't quite sure what. And what really steered me, people always ask, because I am a United Methodist missionary, that is my title, and people ask me when I go to different churches to talk, what brought you to this place in your life where you wanted to be a missionary? And I tell them, well, I didn't grow up saying I want to be a missionary, but I credit a lot of that to the people in my community who raised me. Because they raised me to care about other people, and especially the United Methodist Church community, and also that there are people in need who need our help. So service was instilled on me by my parents especially. But as far as Marshall was concerned, all I ever saw were people who had money, people who lived in houses, people who were not living on the streets. Although there were people there, but I couldn't, they weren't prominent, in our small town area. But I went to Washington, D.C. on this youth trip, and it was arranged by one of our United Methodist leaders, Noni Bollinger out of Shelbyville, and she and her husband, and one of the young pastors, Pastor Wes Wilkins. He was I think he was 23, 24 years old, straight out of seminary, very good looking and handsome. And there were 7 of us that went, and I'm in high school at 16 years old, and there's handsome Wes, and he had a guitar, and he sang really cool songs. And so we went to Washington, D.C., and it was meant to introduce us to what the United Methodist Church is doing in Washington, D.C. through the Church of Society, and that is working with peace and justice issues. I had no idea churches were involved in legislation that we considered were important, like, watching out for our environment, watching out for people who had no money, or our programs within the government that were helping those who, were without jobs, or unwed mothers and so forth. I had no idea the church was involved in that sort of thing. I just thought church was going to church on Sunday and praying and going back home and forgetting about it.
Kind of opened the eyes.
Oh my goodness, it did. And we went to soup kitchens, and we were in charge of handing out food to people, and there was a huge line all the way around the block. I had no idea in my capital of my country that there were people in such great need.
Do you recall what year that was, Connie?
That was 82, 1982, 81, 82. And I had no idea. And we also went to the Pentagon to visit some officials. And at that time, the nuclear wars race was going on. And I just remember sitting here with a general in the U.S. Army who was telling me that this was a good thing, this escalation of nuclear weapons by Russia and America was a good thing because it was deterring us from blowing each other up. And I just was appalled. I just couldn't understand how one person having a better weapon than another person and the other person creating more weapons to annihilate the other countries. I just couldn't understand how that was a good thing. And I remember, okay, we need people to say no to this. And I think at that point I realized there's a little bit more to being a Christian than just going to church on Sunday. And so that's where I looked into our United Methodist programs, and I found out that we can serve overseas, not in the capacity of a missionary, but you can do it as a teacher if you want. And I did that, and then it kind of went on from there. And then
sounds like you kind of had an epiphany there.
I had an epiphany. It was one of those, turning points in your life, that you have. When you suddenly realize that, okay, I know my pathway. And it's just kind of gone on from there. So then I went to Japan, then I went to Taiwan as a teacher for a girls' school, and now I'm in China as a United Methodist missionary, although we don't say missionary for when you're in China, because we don't have missionaries in China according to the government. But I'm a teacher, and I work with the Chinese church just as a member of the church community, much like I would here in Marshall. And as far as proselytizing, which means bringing people to your particular faith, we cannot do that in China. That is against the law for a foreigner to do that, but not against the law for a Chinese person to proselytize to another Chinese person. So when students are curious about me going to church on Sunday, because I don't do outings with them, I say, well, now Sundays are free for me. I go to church. And they say, well, what's that all about? And I say, well, why don't you come with me? And I will introduce you to the Chinese church. And they think that there's all these foreigners in the church. They are astounded when we come to church that the service is in Chinese, that our pastor is Chinese, that all the parishioner members are Chinese. And they think that, I don't know where they think these foreigners are coming from, because there's not very many of us in this city of 3 million Chinese people. But they really start to understand now, oh, well, maybe Christianity is not a foreigner's religion. Maybe it also is centered in our China, among our Chinese people as well. And then I just let my Chinese brothers and sisters in Christ take over from there, and that's fine.
So that's what you're supposed to do, it sounds like.
I think that's what you're supposed to do everywhere, kind of. It's not about me bringing someone to this particular religion and introducing them. It's a community effort. It's the same thing, I think, in our own country as well. I mean, you shouldn't take credit for everything. I made this person a Christian. I don't think it works that way. It's a community of people that come together that work with someone to help them experience faith from a different perspective than maybe they would have had before.
Now, your students, Connie, what age range are they?
They're college. I teach at the college level.
Okay.
But I can also teach I can teach in the States. I can teach at junior high, high school, and college, because I have a master's degree. But I'm not certified for kindergartners. But in China, I can teach anybody. I don't need a certificate for that. If you're a foreigner and you are a native speaker, then you can be hired. And
Did you get your master's degree from Eastern also?
Southern Illinois University. That was in EFL, English as a Foreign Language. And we, at that point, did not have that degree at Eastern Illinois University. And also, I got a graduation, I was a graduate student, so it paid for everything. And that's what I wanted. So that worked out very, very nicely. Worked out really well. And then I would come back for visits to Marshall. And, it's interesting, people, there are some people who say, oh, I just want to get out of Marshall. I don't ever want to come back here again. And, I have a foot in both worlds. I really love my community of Marshall. I love sharing this community with my students. And, and the big city life is fun. I enjoy that. But I really like my small town roots. I really do. So I'm very proud of that.
This large city that you're in, and what is the name of that town?
It's called Luzhou. Luzhou. I tell people it's the name of two brothers. One's Lou, one is Joe. Put together, Luzhou. And it's a river town, so it's on the Yangtze River.
Yangtze, okay.
So I still get my country feel, like, you know, Marshall surrounded by cornfields and such, and the same thing in my town, because I live right on the Yangtze River, so I don't live in the big city of Luzhou. So
Did you say it was 3 million people?
it's about 3 million, 3.5 million. And it's considered like Marshall would be a county seat. It is kind of the county seat of our area. So that means that all of the government buildings are there. So when we have to apply for our visas in order to stay in the country, we don't have to go to the big capital city to do that, whereas many people do. We get to just go to our local government area, because we're kind of a provincial city, which means that we have the ability, or they have the ability, to do all of the work that needs processing and needs done, which is very convenient. Otherwise, you're going to have to go to the capital city, which is 3.5 hours away, and it just makes for kind of a bit of a hassle.
Is there a lot of public transportation then in Luzhou?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you have buses, you have taxis, and we also have a little tiny airport, which is very interesting, because that airport was the first airport in China that had a real runway, one that was made out of cement and gravel and everything, rather than just being, you know, just dirt. And it was built by the Flying Tigers that came over in the 1937, when Japan was bombing the heck out of China at that point. And so they came over and they built an airport. And I actually know the daughter of the engineer who built that airport, and he was Chinese. And now he is, I believe he is still living, and he is like 111 years old, and he is in the States. But I do know his daughter, and she's in her 90s now. My goodness. And that's quite a history. I mean, it really something. And I always, many people died building that airfield, because they didn't have any, everything was hand labor. They actually had to carry the rocks from the Yangtze River, and the rollers, which weighed tons, they had to push that by hand, and many people got caught under the rollers and died. And not only that, is that in China at that time in the 30s, when you had this big building project going on, you brought your families with you, and and you just set up these tents or stayed out in the open, and there were thousands of Chinese living out in the open. Of course, there's dysentery, the water isn't sanitary, people are dying because they're getting diseases, and thousands of people died building this airfield.
So you're saying basically their method of transportation and construction were probably axes, pickaxes, and a wheelbarrow?
Just about. In hand labor. And they carried this rock. I mean, they had, according to Jean Wu, who was the daughter of the engineer, they made a line that was like 1/2 mile long of people that carried to pass the rocks from the Yangtze River, which was 1/2 mile away, to the site that they needed it to be placed on, because that's how they built the airfield. They put the rocks on the bottom, and then they had the concrete poured on top, and then they had certain other methods before the rollers came out, before they crushed it down. It is the foundation of that airfield, that's it, the runway, that's the foundation. So it's lasted for all these years.
I assume now there's some commercial flights going in and out
and
of the airport?
They're few, because it's a little tiny airport. But we do have flights that go daily. One goes daily to Shanghai, one to Beijing, one to, nothing goes to Hong Kong. Kunming, that's kind of out there in the west. So we have a few daily flights that are regular flights, and they add a little bit more every couple years. So when I fly out of my town, I fly out of Luzhou and go directly to Shanghai, and then I change and go on. Otherwise, I'd have to go to the capital city, which is 3.5 hours away by bus, and it's kind of a pain. So it's a little easier to do it this way. here you go in Marshall, where there's no taxis, no buses. My students always want to know about my little tiny town. I tell them it's a village. I explain to them, I say, it's a village, okay? It's not a city. Okay, and well, what do you do there? Do you have a movie theater? I said, no. Do you have schools? I said, we have schools. Do you have buses? Can I get there by bus? Can I get there by train? And I said, no, we all need our own car. And they think that that's, oh my gosh, you must be very rich. And I'm like, well, actually, we can get secondhand cars for pretty good prices, which you cannot in China. You got to buy a brand new car in China. Nobody wants secondhand cars. And everybody considers you having arrived in the world if you can have your own car and if you can own your own apartment. If you own an apartment, if you have your own car, you have arrived in the world.
What about the cars that have been used up, shall we say?
I have no idea what happens to them. I think they just...
like a trade-in on a car?
No, oh no, never trade-ins, no. I don't know whatever happens to the secondhand cars. To be honest...
That's strange.
Well, to be honest, because this has happened just within the last 10 years that Chinese have had enough money to buy their own cars. Probably they aren't quite old enough to get rid of yet. I don't think they might pass them on to their kids, maybe, but more and more students are now learning how to drive, and you have to pay for those classes. That's about $800 US to take a class to drive a car. And one of my students from Beijing, he paid $1,300 for his class because if you want to speed up the process, it's about a 3-month, it's a 3-month, course that you take. And if you also want to have, if you don't have a car to practice on, see your extra money, you get a car to practice on, and also you get bumped up to the beginning of the list when it comes time for the testing. Instead of waiting for everybody else to have their test, if you pay this high amount, your car license or training school will allow you to take your test before everybody else. And when I say everybody else, there are about 800 to 1,000 people to take a test. They have a 3-day test, and you have to wait until everybody takes their test. So if you want to, and they get them all done in a day. Don't ask me how they do it. They have 800 people, and they all have numbers, and you.
Is the test computerized?
No, this is a driving test. And you have the written test. Now that's different, but you have the driving test, 3 days of driving. And you have to do all of these very intricate moves. And I will tell you that Chinese are very good at driving and parking and getting into little nooks and crannies that I swear I wouldn't even touch with a 10-foot pole.
With that kind of training and rigorous testing, I guess I can understand how they would be.
And there are just so many cars in the road, and the roads were not made for this kind of car traffic because they were made, 20 years ago when we didn't have private cars.
Carts.
We just didn't have them. They just weren't around. You had one car that belonged to a school or university, and that car and that driver were in charge of taking the leaders around to special places or driving the foreigners around, and now everybody has their own car.
Were they pretty much donkey carts and oxen carts and stuff?
On the streets, you had the little rickshaws. Okay. But they didn't, they weren't pulling them, but they were bicycling them. So you had a little 3-wheel bicycles with the little 2-person carriage on the back. And they would just, bike you around.
Does someone have to be a certain age before they can take that driving test?
Their driving regulations 18 years old and older. Ours are 16. But we give the tests in classes. We don't, in your high school, you don't have to pay for it. And in China, you have to pay for it. And more want their license because it opens them up to more ability for jobs. They can be truck drivers, they could be, taxi drivers and so forth. So it gives them a little bit more opportunity to make money.
Does that also increase the market for cars?
Yes.
I'm sure it would. Because
absolutely. I knew someone who worked for a dealership, and she was in charge of accounting. And I asked her, well, how many cars do you sell in about a month? I'm thinking maybe 2 or 3. 30, almost one every day. I mean, and even more than that. I can't even imagine that in the States. I mean, a dealership in the States, my goodness, I mean, they'll be lucky if they get a couple cars off the lot in, in a week.
But that must mean there's some substantial income
there
to
is.
Provide that.
Yes,
source of revenue.
people are saving their money. Salaries are going up, even among teachers, which is nice to see because it was pretty bad before. But it's, and people who have money, they love to spend it. And what do they spend it on? They spend it on cars, they spend it on buying a new apartment, and buying all of the things that go into that apartment and decorating it and make it look beautiful. But those are people who have money and have a profession. And then we have the very, very poor, and those are in the farmers, and they are out in the fields, and many of them work in factories to make extra money to send their kids to college. The problem is when the kids graduate from college, there are not a lot of jobs waiting for them. Teaching is a great profession to go into, but then you got to find a job to do it. And a lot of the students that graduate from our school who are going to be teachers, they don't want to go back to the countryside and teach in these little tiny piddly schools that don't pay them hardly anything at all. They want to stay in the big city and teach. But unfortunately, those jobs are hard to come by because there are people with better education and they're very highly competitive. So one of my students wanted a public teaching job, and all he has is a graduation certificate from our school because we are like a junior college. We are not a university. So he finished his 3 years, and now he can teach at the junior high level or below, but not the high school level because he needs a BA for that. And he went to a job interview for a countryside school, for a public countryside school, which will give him great pay, and it will, well, steady pay, not great, but it would give him steady pay, and it would allow him to live on the campus for free. It would give him discounted cafeteria meals. It would give him benefits, so he's got a pension that he's paying into, plus it would give him bonuses, every year. And those are the jobs that they want. There were 60 applicants. And he had to fight his way through 60 applicants. And I'm very impressed that they actually chose him because he's just from our 3-year college or school. Yeah, school. However, the downside of that was that he needed to pass the public school teaching test for all teachers. They have a standardized test. And you have to pass that test in order to continue in the public school system. And he did not pass that test. He failed it. So he had to give up that job. So now he's working at a private school, which is a training school for students who want to do better in their, in their studies. So
can he go back and take that test?
He can take that test again. It's given twice a year. So he's going to try for it again. And I'm so sorry he had to give up his public school teaching job because it was a good job and he was doing an excellent. He was a very good teacher. Okay. And his English skills were very good too. So, well, it's a little very different than here in the States. I mean, you can't graduate from, you can't finish a 2-year college here in the States and go into teaching. We won't allow that. But they allow that in China. The 3 years or the 2 years that you have is just so little education. It's so little. It really is. I think they need 4 years, and I think they need a very good student teaching experience.
Connie, there's so much controversy right now over education in the United States. Funding of things, government mandates. It just seems like it goes on forever. No Child Left Behind and all of this stuff. Is it a better education, do you think, in China as opposed to what might be in the United States? I
think the States caters to the needs of every student, and I think that that's very important. Okay. I think we really do. We have those who are handicapped, for example, those who have physical disabilities, those who are, they have a different level of learning. They may be slower or faster, and I think some people say we cater to them too much. Yeah, we treat them with too much, give them too much special consideration, and then when we go to China, everybody is taught as if they are the same. And that is a problem because many of the students who come to my little 3-year school, they did not test well at all. And that is why they're at our school, because their testing scores were so low to get into college that they just couldn't do anything.
And everyone doesn't have the same mental capacity.
No, and they also don't have the same interests as far as subjects are concerned. So parents push some of my students who are English majors, they push them into English because they say, well, you study English and you can be an English teacher, whereas they have absolutely no ability in English at all. But yet parents are pushing them into that, and then they're paying for them to come to our school, which is ends up being about $800 a year, which is quite a lot of money, sometimes up to $1,000. And they didn't do well in high school, and they were considered lazy, and they were, and the teachers weren't nice to them and said they were stupid. And, this happened recently to one of the boys that I've been mentoring, and I've been mentoring since he was like 13 years old. And he just finished his college entrance examination test, which is a standardized test, and it's a two-day test, and all students take this. And if their scores are high, they get to go to a fantastic, wonderful university, and they get to, move on to bigger and better things. And if their test scores are very bad, they have to go to some little piddly 3-year school like mine. And he did very poorly. But he worked so hard, and his English is amazing. But his science and math scores were horrible. So this is like an ACT, SAT test. They test all the skills. So his scores were so low in math and science that it pulled him way down. And not one of the 6 schools that he applied for accepted him, and mine was one of them. So his parents basically told him, you have to repeat your 4th year of high school so that you can retake this test, because that's the only way you can do it, and hopefully get a better score, and then you can go on to a college or university, to study at. I personally, I don't know. I felt so bad for him, and his title was, he emailed me and he said, I hate my life. And I felt so sad. And he says, my parents are telling me I'm stupid, and my relatives don't like me because I'm dumb. And, they're telling me that I shouldn't be using a computer because I'm playing games on the computer, and I should be studying right now. Well, school hasn't started yet. So I feel bad for him. And if he had been in our school system, I know, first of all, he would have been accepted to a university of some kind. I know he would, and I know he would succeed. And he wants to be a radio announcer. He wants to use his English and be on a radio or television. And I don't think that will happen to him in that country. I think that if he were here, he would really blossom, and I feel sad about that.
You mentioned high school. Now, do they have the basic same structure of the elementary, secondary, high school?
That's what they do. Yeah, they have elementary is like K through 6th grade, then 7th, 8th, 9th is junior high, and then 10th, 11th, 12th is high school. And a lot of other schools have adopted it that way as well. So, and it works the same way, and they have all the same subjects, except they do need English. They have English subject from junior high to high school is required. So they have that class every day.
What about scholarships? Is there anything like that? We have so many wonderful scholarships here in Marshall that are available to students.
They have government scholarships available for the very, very poor, and they're good scholarships, but they don't pay a whole lot. I mean, we have, our school is from $800 to $1,200 a year, and if they get a scholarship, it might pay for $200 of that. Otherwise, from that, parents who are farmers have to come up with the rest of the money, and they scrimp and they save from day one when that kid is born, and they borrow from relatives to see them through at least the first year, and then they worry about the second and third later. But our school is cheap. I mean, there are other schools that are very, very pricey. And this young man that I was talking about, his English name is Joe, and Joe was accepted to a school. I said he wasn't, but he was. And the school was $2,500 a year. His parents cannot afford that at all. And I'm sure that school would be happy to have him because he's going to pay that great tuition, you know. So they didn't care what his score was. They just wanted him to come to that school. So poor thing.
With the scholarships, you mentioned government. Are there corporations and businesses that also provide scholarships?
Not that I am aware of.
Here?
Not here. No, not that I'm aware of. Most of the scholarships are provincial or they're from government. However, we do have a lot of NGOs, non-governmental organizations in China that are Chinese founded and Chinese based, and they have scholarships for certain individuals that need them, and they aren't very. But I don't think they do the money scholarships. I think they will help do other kinds of things, like if you need food, you know, they have a food program. The organization I work for, which is the Amity Foundation, has a special. What do we call it? They have a special lunch program for students from the farming communities, and they have a lunch program for them in that you pay X amount of money, you as a sponsor pay X amount of money, and that will make sure that this child every noon has a meal that consists of rice, vegetables, and meat, which they will not get at home because their parents cannot afford to feed them really, really well. And I think that program is amazing. So I think it's for like, I can't remember I think it's like $125 to sponsor one child, and that will give them for an entire semester, Monday to Friday, they will have a lunch. That's a good lunch for them. And I really think that's an amazing program. And also the Amity Foundation has scholarships not for high school students, but for college students, and they have scholarships that they can also apply for, but those are very limited, you know, and far between, so not too many people get those.
Is the criteria for that income and ability to pay then?
Yeah, it's, you know, it depends upon your family, how well they can afford, you know, to send you to school, and not so much on grades, but I think they make sure that you're going to pass. Not just, you know, and of course the money goes directly to the school, not to you into your bank account, because who knows what will happen to it then. Amity is very careful about following through what happens to their money. So it's a little different system, but I really, really believe that our school help every single student that needs help. And I especially, I admire our country for their concern about people who, you know, have physical handicaps, because in China, we don't have access to, you know, the handicapped people do not have access to a good education unless they can get up and down stairs, okay, or unless they are, you know, not disfigured in such a way that is going to cause people not to study very well. I mean, for some reason, you know, the Chinese think if you're disfigured, you know, that it's going to detract from the others in the class, really? And we don't want you in there. And when you apply to schools, you have to send a picture. They have to see your picture. And so they know, you know, if something's a little off about you. So-called off. So, but I will say that at my school, I'm so happy that my school is coming around on this, and we do have people who are suffering from, for example, dwarfism that are on our campus. We have a couple people who are albinos, and, you know, which is quite different for Chinese people. We have had some that have been horrendously disfigured. I mean, to the point where it is very difficult not to stare. People who have been burnt, who have lost ears, who don't have a nose. I mean, we had this one poor little girl, and she did not have a nose. And you could just see right through that. And I was so proud that our school did not discriminate against her, and that her classmates, of course, they were surprised at the beginning, but her classmates accepted her for who she was, and she got a 3-year education. And we've had other students who, you know, have had limps or have muscular dystrophy, but have been able to, you know, walk around, but, you know, it's very noticeable something's wrong, or cerebral palsy, and we have allowed them to come to our school. I mean, that's a big step for Chinese school systems.
What happens then, though? Say the girl without the nose, when she finished school, Was she
Once again, she'll have.
I mean, was she?
Yeah, once again, she'll have to. Well,
pushed out of the job market? Or?
Once again, she's going to have to fight for her place in the world. You know, I'm sure she fought. She fought all through, all through elementary school and high school to be accepted, because a lot of schools wouldn't want her around. And,
which sounds to me like there's quote discrimination.
A lot of discrimination against.
Oh boy.
People such as that. And I was just so proud that our school gave her the education that she needed, as well as a few others. And so, I can't see that happening in all schools, but our school realized that this was very important. And I don't think they were really just accepting her just to get the money, because actually, $800 to $1,200, for like, six people is not going to make that much of a difference. They could have easily just said, okay, you can't come.
How many students do you have in the school then?
We have 8,000.
8,000.
However, we want to reach 12,000. I say we, well, the administration would like 12,000, but we don't have room for all of them because we don't have enough dormitories. So our campus is moving. And it will move to a brand new campus that's outside of the city with lots of room to build onto. But this has been an ongoing project for 10 years. So 10 years ago, I was told our school will move within 5 years. 5 years ago, I was told our school will move within 3 years. It will be completed. 2 years ago, I was told that I would return in September and we would be on a brand new campus with a gorgeous brand new buildings. Well, that hasn't happened. We have one building built on this ground. It is the Student Union. That's the only building that is there. And I have been told by the president that next year, in February, we will all move to the new campus. Well, there's only one building there, so I really don't think that's going to happen. And the school is, it's funded by the provincial government, by the city of Luzhou, and then, of course, by the school itself, whatever money comes in. So it's funded by 3 categories. It's a government, college or, supported community college. And so when the money doesn't come through, then they halt on the building process. So it's just a matter of getting the provincial government and Luzhou city government to, kind of get on the move on. And they do want us off of the property that we are on currently, because we are right on the Yangtze River. It is prime real estate property for building gorgeous, brand new, lovely apartment buildings.
I was going to ask you about that. I'm glad you mentioned that. People
will move into, and then we have a gorgeous view of the Yangtze River, and it's in a very good location. But, we aren't going to be moving there unless we have some place to move our students to. So unless somebody speeds up the process, we're going to be there for maybe another 3 or 4 or 5 years, 10 years.
You mentioned dormitories. Then are your students pretty much all on campus as on students staying there, or do some of them commute?
Very few commute. We have very few that live in the city of Luzhou, and everybody is assigned a dormitory. So it kind of goes into your fees. It's about $800 a year. And you get to stay in that dormitory for the full year. It's not for 9 months. So you can stay there all summer if you want and get part-time jobs in the city. And of course, the dormitories are 8 people to a room, and they're all bunk beds, and then you have shared bathrooms. If you want to pay more, you can have 4 people to a room, and you can have a bathroom that's within your little compartment. But they're very small rooms, they're very tiny, and if you don't like your roommate, or if your roommate steals from you, then not a whole lot you can do about it. You can try to have the roommates changed, but the school kind of frowns on that. They like everybody to stay together and get along. So usually who you end up with for a year is who you stay with for a year.
What about the balance of male and female students?
That's a good question. I'm not quite sure. I know that within the English department, most of them are women, because women do well in language, and that's the same in the States. So I have English teaching majors. I have 270 students, and of those 270, I have 12 that are boys. So a majority of my classes are all girls. But if you go over to the PE department, you will notice that there's almost all boys. Or if you go to the art department, it's kind of a mixture of both in the art department. And in the math department and science department and computers, all guys. And business management, also mostly men, although there are some girls. But when it comes to women being, what they have, I don't know what we call it, there's a hotel industry major, and those are all girls, because almost all of them are girls, because those are the people who work at the front desk. Those are the people who work in the restaurant. You take your orders, and those are the people that stand at the entrance to the hotel and greet you and welcome you in.
The programs here now have got the word hospitality in them somewhere.
Is that what it called?
Studies. And I don't know exactly.
We call it hotel. It's called hotel management in Chinese, and I just, and mostly it's the girls. The guys are not anywhere near that one. And then, of course, we also have a medical college in the city. And that college has just a wide variety of men and women, and they specialize in different areas of medicine. So that's a little different category.
Now, you mentioned yours was a 3-year school?
Yeah, 3 years.
Do some of them go to that and then go on to more advanced in a university somewhere?
Yeah, if you finish with our 3-year school, you then can move on for another, I believe it's another 2 years to an accredited university. You have passed the test to get into it, and then you can receive your bachelor degree. And now we also have a program that's a correspondence course that you can do to get your BA. Well, States the same way. You have to pay for that, of course, pay extra money. But you basically just study the books on your own, and then you go to the testing place when it comes time, and you take the test. And if you pass it, then you pass that course. And you don't have to take classes. It's just a correspondence course. But I believe on your certificate, it does stipulate that this was not, you weren't in a classroom, but you did a correspondence course. So that's, so they put it on the diploma somehow. I'm not quite sure how that works.
Are the classes and even your work, are they in English, or are most of the classes in Chinese? My
class is in English because I teach oral English, and I'm the foreign teacher, and nobody knows, my students do not know that I speak Chinese. They have not a clue, and I don't let them know that. Those are the first year students. They don't know. And when they talk to me, I just say, I'm sorry, I don't understand. You're going to have to use your English. I'm so sorry. Now, my second year and third year students, they all know because, they've had me for a year, and they hear me, out talking to people, and they're like, oh my gosh, you can speak Chinese. I was like, well, a little. I can speak a little, My first year students know never. But in their Chinese classes, I just teach oral or writing or reading. Now, in the other classes they have to take for this particular major, they have to take English grammar, English phonetics, English handwriting. They have to take teaching methodology. Those courses are usually in Chinese and English, depending upon the teacher. And they're all English teachers. They're Chinese English teachers, and they're all very competent in the language. But, when it comes to teaching methodology, you're not going to be using English in that. They have to know all the names of, all of our philosophers and so forth in Chinese, so they can take the test and do fairly well on them. So that's a little different. But with foreign teachers, it's always English in the classroom.
Now, are there other American teachers in the school?
We have 2 Peace Corps members. The Peace Corps left, how many years ago? The Peace Corps left 13 years ago, left China because of SARS. That was the bird flu, whatever, that killed so many people. And they were evacuated out within 24 hours. Our area of the country, our city was not affected at all, but that was just across the board. That was our U.S. government, and Peace Corps falls under Army and, military personnel and so forth, and embassy personnel. So whatever is for them is also for the Peace Corps people. And they just evacuated them out 24 hours, and they did not return for 10 years. And then they came back to our school 5 years ago, I believe. And so we've had 4 now since I've been back, and we're getting 2 new ones this summer. And the Peace Corps used to concentrate on environmental issues, not teaching. But that's not what China wanted. China wanted teachers. So eventually the government figured out, well, I guess we should change our focus. But it took them a long time to do that because, you know, all these governments come into these other countries and they say, we know what you need and this is what you will do and these are who we will send you, rather than talk to people and get to know them and listen to what their needs really are. And I always thought our American government was better at that, but obviously not, because they didn't do it with the Peace Corps. I hope the Peace Corps people aren't listening to this. But we eventually figured it out. So, oh, you want teachers? We can do that. You know, so now we're on the right pathway, and we are, you know, coaching them and directing them into how to be a teacher, even though a majority of Peace Corps people are not teachers, but they learn within 2 years. And
well, obviously, we've talked a lot about education, and that's great. I'm glad that you're dwelling on that. And apparently you will continue to stay in that type of position then, right, for some time?
I believe so, yeah. Because, you know, working with the United Methodist Church, we have 3-year contracts. And I'm currently the only United Methodist missionary in China. So,
really?
Yeah, we have like 300 overseas missionaries, and I'm the only one in China at this time. So I have a feeling that I will probably always stay there.
That's a very unique and elite position.
It is, and it'll be interesting to see in the future how China will be accepting, you know, religion, because right now, the Cultural Revolution, everything was shut down, and in 1981, the churches began opening, Catholic churches and Protestant churches, and Christianity became not such a suspicious kind of, you know, religion. However, it's just be interesting. It's more open. There's more freedom, but there's still a great deal of constraints. We have some problems with what are called the Uyghurs. They are the terrorist organization way up in the Xinjiang province. The Uyghurs are a minority people, and they are majority are Muslims. We have some Buddhists as well, and there are a lot of young people who have been, you know, misrepresented in their communities. The Han Chinese, which a majority of people are Han Chinese, have come into their areas, much as we did to the Native American people, white people, and kicked them out, you know, took their jobs away. There are no jobs for them, and set up shop, changed the language. The Uyghurs speak their own language. The Han Chinese speak Chinese, and they force the Uyghurs to learn Chinese in their school system. They don't want the Chinese, we don't speak your language in the school system. You must learn our language, and a great deal of oppression going on, and that started in the 80s and the 90s. You know, China wanted us all to be one together, one big happy family. Well, got a lot of different minorities in China, and they weren't happy about that. So there are, you know, and they will lash out, you know, and they will kill people and go around with knives, and, you know, and they do a lot of things that the government says, you know, the terrorist activities, and they throw people in jail, and that doesn't help out any. So that gives Christians a bad name as well, because if this is a religious group and we have the Christians who are a religious group, you know, they get a little frightened, although the Christians tend to be very passive people and service-oriented. We don't go around, you know, killing people. So we will see if that continues onward, you know.
Is the attendance, like you mentioned earlier, at church then pretty free and open? Or
at my church it is. I go to the Luzhou Protestant Church, and the reason why our Protestant church has such a great relationship with the city officials and also the city government is because the Canadian Methodist missionaries came to this particular city in 1907. They set up a hospital. They set up a medical center. They had a nursing program. They opened up schools. I mean, they did all of these wonderful things for the city of Luzhou, and they had an excellent relationship with the city officials. When wars broke out, there were a lot of wars breaking out between people in the south and people in the north, and kind of Luzhou kind of fell in the middle. They protected the people, and they had a lot of Chinese generals who came through who became Christians because these missionaries were, servicing others. And because of this foundation that was established, and why we have such a great medical college, is because of the missionaries. So Christianity in our area had a very positive effect on everyone. And this is why, in my area, we have such a good relationship. And anytime the Christian church wants to do some service to people, it's not a problem. We have an open clinic that has about 100 beds in it, so I call it a glorified clinic because it's pretty big. And we have a pharmacy. We have a senior citizen center that is run partly by the church and the city of Luzhou. So we have that cooperation. So for my area, it is a really good place to be a Christian. However, in other areas of China that have been farther out and where, Christianity is a little bit strange or different, then we do have some clashes between the Christians who are worshiping there and the local officials, So then there becomes a few problems. And those are usually what you hear about in the news, not so much the positive stuff from my area.
Well, you've been there quite a while, and obviously you're speaking of Chinese and all helps. Have you ever felt threatened or uneasy, uncomfortable?
No, never. I mean, I get a little scared in my own country. Like, what is it? My mom and I went to Chicago like 2 weeks ago, and then we finished with the theater play. Okay, so we're coming out of the theater, and it's about, I think it was 10 o'clock at night, and my mother immediately said, should we take a taxi back? It was only like 3 blocks from the hotel, and I'm just used to China. I said, no, just walk. Just, people are around. People were everywhere. I said, just stay with the people, and we will go the 3 blocks we need to go, and the lighting is great, and no problem. But she was scared, and I was thinking, maybe if I were by myself, once I got away from the crowds, and if I were walking down one of those avenues, even though it's Michigan Avenue, it's well lighted, maybe I would be a little scared too. But I'm never scared in China. I walk around at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, come back from, visiting with friends or something, and I never am fearful, ever, that someone's going to, hurt me or attack me. So as far as my personal safety is concerned, no. But you do have to be careful with the pickpockets, okay? I mean, you just got to watch out for your money or else you're going to get it stolen. So just the basic things. But I don't think anybody's going to stab me or hurt me in any way. So I never, ever am ever afraid.
Is there this goes back to some old things I had read a long time ago. A family will take care of their elders and support them, as opposed to, like, we may use a nursing home here, that there really were not any such things in China.
Yeah, we're moving a little bit toward more nursing homes and housing facilities for the elderly, because a lot of these young people who are doing very well, they don't want to take care of mom and dad in their old age. Or a lot of them don't have the money to take care of mom and dad. So what do? But to be honest, a majority of my students, grandma and grandpa live with the family, and they take care of grandma and grandpa, and they love grandma and grandpa. And, in many cases, usually what happens, in the countryside anyway, is if you have a child, usually you give the child to grandma and grandpa, mom and dad, to take care of. And then you, as the parent, go to work. And then until the child gets to be school age. And then, so a lot of parents will send the child off to live with grandma and grandpa, which is clear across country or across the province, and they will stay with grandma and grandpa until they reach age like 6. Then they will return to their village, and then they will go to school there. So it's taking care of, grandparents taking care of the kids so that mom and dad can work and make money and save that money for their education in the future. And that's very normal, you know. So the kid really grows up thinking grandma and grandpa are mom and dad. So it's very hard on them when they return, because a lot of times they don't even know mom and dad very well. So, you know, it can be a bit traumatizing. And a lot of students write about that, you know, when they had to leave grandma and grandpa and had to go and stay with mom and dad for a change, and they were just, they just felt awful. They screamed, they cried, they kicked. No, don't leave. I don't want to leave. You know, and they had, but then later they realized the importance of going to live with mother and father and not staying with grandma and grandpa who need a rest.
It's a
cultural
difference that would be quite an adjustment, I think.
Yeah. And there used to be, you know, you hear a lot about the abandonment of children. You know, if it's a girl child, she was abandoned on the side of the road because I wanted a boy child, because the boy child helps on the farm. And you know, and in Chinese culture, when you get married, your parents live. You live with the male. You live with the male's parents, and you take care of the male's parents. And the female's parents are just left to do whatever they want. So, you know, they're left all by themselves. So most of the Chinese want the male, want the son, because they know that they'll be taken care of. So it used to be we had a lot of abandonment by, you know, the girl babies. Not so much anymore. I think that the government has done very well in, you know, explaining the importance of both, you know, male and female, but a lot of them do want the son.
Still. For several years, were there a limit on the number of children?
There is a limit
supposedly permitted.
1 child per family, and that has now changed. There's a lot of different regulations in there. If you belong to a minority people, so there are 56 different minority tribes in China.
I didn't realize that. Just
like we have the Native Americans here, the Chinese have 56 different minority tribes. The Uyghurs, the Tibetans, they're very different. Some groups in Guangxi and so forth. They're allowed to have more than 1 child because it is a part of their culture. And the Chinese think the Chinese government thinks it's important for us to encourage our minority people to, you know, have more and share their language and so forth. If you have a child who dies, you can have another child. If you have a child that is handicapped, you can have another child to have a healthy child. And now, if you are from a single, okay, so if you are the only child in your family and you marry someone who is also the only child in their family, you can have 2 children. Because that will allow your child, after they grow up, to take care of the mother's mom and dad, and then the other child will take care of the father's mom and dad. And this way we won't have any problems with, you know, dealing with who's going to take care of, you know, 4 aging individuals. Now 1 child will take care of 2 and the other child will take care of the 2. And so that's also a new regulation. So there are ways that the government is trying to deal with the problem of elderly people having no place to stay, and also making everybody happy. And when we had the earthquake, you know, we had an earthquake in 2008, the Wenchuan earthquake that was so awful, and so many parents lost their only child in that earthquake. A lot, you know, immediately the government just said, you know, just put in your application and you can have another child, no problem. But the trouble is that many of them were, you know, older, in their 40s and 50s, and they couldn't have a second child, you know, because they were too old. So then that was also another situation. It was horrible.
Connie, you mentioned we kind of started to hear about people wanting cars and being able to buy cars and stuff. Are there any United States cars sold in China, or are most of them European?
Well, a lot of them are European cars. Mercedes-Benz is a big one. Oh my gosh, I don't know how they afford that. I mean, their cars are nice. They have a lot of Chinese brands now, and they don't really like the Chinese brands because they say they're not so good. But I see a lot of them going around. And what else do I see? Toyotas, Hyundai. Hyundai is becoming quite popular because they make the little compact little cars. And then we have these little, I don't know what they're called, little half cars. They only have, what are they called? There's a little...
Smart cars.
Is that what they are? They have 2 doors and that's it. You know, they look like they've been squashed in half and cut in half. We got those. Those are great because, you know, you can just park them anywhere. I never see those on the interstate though. I don't think they allow them to drive on the interstate, but they will let them go around town. A lot of motorcycles, a lot of little mopeds. They like mopeds. And little, you know, not a lot of American cars. I don't see any Fords around very much. I think those are just too expensive. I think they just can't afford them.
Or too big, too, I think, maybe.
Well, there's some big cars in China now. They like their big cars. Some places have, the Jeeps. They love the Jeeps. Big Jeeps. I have friends who have big Jeeps. I'm like, what are you doing with this big Jeep, you know? And they like their vans and their, you know, their SUVs, and if they can afford them, they'll get them. It looks great for the neighbors, you know, to watch you drive around in this SUV. So they're moving up in the world, some of them.
Do you know what the gasoline price per gallon or how it's sold liter?
I think it is about the same as it is here. They sell by the liter, but I think it ends up being about the same. Okay. According to, but the government regulates those, so it doesn't fluctuate a whole lot. So I think it was $3 a gallon, $2.53, about the same it is here, just about. But it doesn't fluctuate quite as much. And, you know, and for you cannot, when you go to the gas station, I mean, it's just like, it's a full service gas station. They don't allow self-service, as we did many years ago. We were the same way, you know, so you have to park your car, you get out of your car, and you have to hand them over the keys, and then they will do everything. They will fill it up, they will wash your windows, and then they give it back to you, and then you know, move on. And that's for everybody. So it's a little slow process, and there's a big long line in back of gas stations. You got to pick your gas station that doesn't have such a long line. So that becomes a problem for taxi drivers, because then they have to wait, you know, and they miss out on their fares.
Subject I've just got to ask is about food. I guess being an American, did you have trouble adjusting to Chinese food?
I did when I first got to China. That was like 23 years ago, because the food was not very sanitary. And I mean, the oil was not very sanitary. And, you know, I had stomach problems for the first year. And then I cooked for myself, and I found out, if I cook for myself, I'm not going to have these problems, because my food I know is safe, and I wash my vegetables and everything. But now in China, I mean, my goodness, I mean, 23 years later, 23 years ago, basically you just had the vegetables that were sold in the market, you know, and you had some canned things, but that was about it. And now in China, we have everything packaged. I mean, you can buy frozen bread, you can buy, you know, you can buy frozen, I don't know, what do we call them? Dumplings. You can even buy pizza if you want, frozen pizza. And also all of the vegetables are, you know, they're pretty good. You know, I didn't have any, and the meat has been inspected. Now I don't know how well it's been inspected, but you know, this has a stamp on it. Okay, it's been inspected, which is unusual. And a lot of packaging, and they have all these international brands: Pringles potato chips, Lay's potato chips, Oreo cookies, you know, Nabisco cookies, chocolate. Dove chocolate is really big. Snicker bars, Hershey bars. I mean, all of this. McDonald's, Pizza Hut, Subway.
I was wondering about restaurants and all. And
my goodness.
It seems like things I read, so many of the drive-ins or the fast foods have exploded in China, Japan, India, and some of them.
And they even have their own fast food restaurants, which are, you know, very, very popular because they're a little cheaper than the American fast food restaurants. We have like 3 McDonald's in my town of 3 million, I think. No Starbucks yet, but I'm sure it's coming somewhere. That's about the only Western restaurant we have. We used to have a KFC, but it closed because McDonald's began selling fried chicken, and Chinese love fried chicken. So once McDonald's opened up fried chicken into their doors, then KFC had to close because everybody went to McDonald's. And they love the French fries, and they love the McDonald's ice cream cones. That is a big selling point. All the kids go and have McDonald's ice cream cones. And it's safe, you know. You can trust it rather than another Chinese brand of ice cream. So
Taco Bell was developing quite a number of markets somewhere in Europe. And
really?
I don't know about China or not.
I would think Taco Bell would go over pretty big where I live because it's spicy food. But who knows?
Is there anything that you say in maybe, I guess, in the living conditions and all that, my gosh, it's superior to United States?
I would say among the wealthy, it would be superior because of, where they live. And the apartments are nice. I mean, you can buy some very, very nice apartments. Apartments cost as much as a house. I mean, you're going to be paying $50,000 to $100,000 for an apartment if it's a nice one. For an apartment.
That'd be like a two-bedroom unit or a
that is,
one-bedroom?
well, yeah, maybe have a 2 floors if you got maybe a double floor. But it's an apartment. It's not a house, and you don't have a yard. You have a balcony. But sometimes I'm appalled at how much money Chinese will spend on an apartment. But it is theirs, and it is theirs for life. Now they take out a loan from the bank, and they'll be paying on that for 20 years or so. But it's the same as their houses. Yeah, it's the same with their houses, the mortgage and everything. So,
can that be passed on to an heir then?
yes, then that goes on to the kids. The kids, that's the parents buy the apartment with the expectation that the kids are going to come and live in that apartment and take care of them in their old age. Now, will that happen or not? I mean, if the kids get a job in the city that their parents live in, okay, but sometimes not. So who knows?
Connie, I know you have an affection for dogs.
Oh, I love dogs.
And have had some experience with those. Why don't you tell me about your experience with your pooch?
Okay, well, let's see. I got a Chihuahua in China, Little Flower, about when I first about 10 years ago, and then of course she died. But we had a wonderful time together, and so then I got another one. But the one that is the luckiest little dog is the one that we have here in Marshall, who's Little Lao Lao, which means little old. And Little Lao Lao, I found that dog in the city streets of Chengdu, the capital city, and it was right after the earthquake, the Sichuan earthquake. Now, the Chengdu did not experience any of the damage that other places did in that province. But what happened was when the earthquake hit, everybody ran outside of their homes and their animals ran along with them. And a lot of those animals just ran away. Yeah, just kept running. And so a lot of people lost their pets. And right after the next day, after the earthquake happened, of course, we had all these aftershocks and nobody wanted to stay at home. So everybody was living basically on the streets. We all pulled out our bedding and we just camped out, and people camped out for a month, in the capital city because they were concerned about the aftershocks, and it was kind of scary. It was, but they lost their dogs. So it was sometime after that, a couple months after that, and I don't know if this little dog ran away because of the earthquake or what, but I saw this little dog on the street. And he was, his tongue was hanging out, and I thought, it must be kind of thirsty. And, he's trying to eat something off the ground. He couldn't get it up. His tongue was just, wagging, wiggling back and forth. And then I looked at him, and I said, well, what's wrong, little dog? And he didn't have any teeth, and he had a broken jaw. His jaw was broken. So, and I felt so, I just couldn't leave him there because obviously he was a stray, and he was all skinny and scrawny and bony. So I scooped him up and brought him home and got him healthy, and then nobody wanted him because it was a little Chihuahua and he was awful cute, but he needed some special care, and Chinese just didn't want to bother with him because he wasn't a puppy. And so I brought him back to the States with me, and he's now here in Marshall, and he has a wonderful life in Marshall. So
did you have any restrictions or difficulty bringing the dog back? I mean, did you have requirements that you had to meet to get him into the States?
Yeah, well, I had to research, how to get a dog, from one country to another. And the first thing is that if you are going from a country that has rabies in it, and to another country that also has rabies, you do not have to have any quarantine. If you go from a rabies country to a non-rabies country, then you have quarantine going into that country. So for Britain, I think it's 6 months in quarantine.
I knew there was some heavy times in some of those countries.
Yeah, in Taiwan, I think it's 3 months because they do not have rabies in that country. So, and Hawaii is also the same thing. But if you're going from a rabies country to a rabies country, no quarantine at all. But you do have to have, coming out of China, very, very specialized paperwork. The dog has to be microchipped. It has to have all of the vaccination records have to be transferred to a government vaccination record paper, I guess, and it has to be inspected by a special Chinese doctor and all this stuff. And so for that, you need to spend some time. The dog needs to spend some time in a kennels to have all of that processing done. So I guess that would be the quarantine. But when you get it over in the States, as long as you have your papers in order, you just walk right through customs with your paper in hand. Now, you can try this, you can do this process by yourself if you know where to go, where to take the dog, and you have to go to the capital city, you have to go to Shanghai or Beijing or Guangdong province. You have 3 places you can take the dog to, and you have to know where to take the dog and all the people you need to do the paperwork. And it was just so complicated that I was just like, I don't want to deal with it. So I just went through a private service that did that for you. It's called GlobiPet, Pet Relocation Service. And you just pay a fixed fee, and they take care of everything. They take care of, they pick up you fly the dog to Shanghai, you don't even have to go with the dog. And they will pick it up there, they will quarantine, they will put it in its kennel, they will have all the vaccination records changed over, and then when you come back to the airport to do your overseas flight, they meet you there with your dog and walk you through the airport, all the little places you need to go through, and then your dog, if you're flying on U.S. Airlines, will go with you under the seat if it's small enough. And it will not go with the luggage. If it's too big, it goes with the luggage. So that's what I did. And then, of course, they have all these regulations with the airlines. You have to have a specific carrier, and only 2 animals are allowed to fly on an overseas flight. So you need to book your animal reservation ahead of time and pay $125 fee to put it under the seat, and then everything's okay. But you have to book the flight, and if there are more than 2 on the flight, then the 3rd person, if they would actually come, they're booted off. They won't be allowed on. Well, the person would, but not the dog. So so I had to go through all of that. But I know how to do it. So it's not cheap. So that dog's staying here. Dog's not going back to China unless
it has good attention.
Unless it has to go back to China.
Do you have a pet now?
I have a pet now. I have a dog called May May, who's little sister, and she's also a Chihuahua. And I keep an eye on her. You asked me, are you ever fearful in China for any reason? I'm fearful for the dog because the dog nappers will scoop her up and they will resell her because you can get a pretty fair amount of money for a little dog, and they will look at her and say, oh, it's a female, and I can just see that, oh, we'll breed her, puppy mill. They're going to be surprised because she's been spayed, so she's not going to be having any babies anytime soon. But I do keep an eye on the dog because I have had neighbors who have told me they let their dog out, and where's the dog? I mean, just for 5 minutes or so, and haven't found their dog. And one person found it like 2 months later. A person was on the street near their home selling the dog on the corner, and she came and she said, "That's my dog." And the person didn't argue with her too much, handed it over to her. But that person had their dog stolen. They'll do people will do anything to make money. They're desperate, people are poor.
So do you have someone that takes care of your dog or your pet while you're gone?
Yeah, I have a couple sitters, if one sitter can't take care of my dog, then another sitter does. And if I ever were to return to China, I would pay the money that would be necessary to have her here, but I'm not going to spend all that money just for her to be here for a month and then go back and then have to pay the same amount of money again, so that's kind of silly.
Connie, you've given such a wonderful outline of
Life in China.
And your experience there and education has been a delight to hear.
Thank you, Damien.
Is there some person in your life that you feel has really influenced you more than anyone else?
You know, I used to often say my grandmother. That was my mother's mother. That's all I always talked about, because I'm Connie 1, she was Connie 2, you know, so she's, but I think it's my mother. Hello, Mother. I really think it's my mom. I'm a lot like her, and she has really, you know, she listens to all of my problems that I have in my life, and she gives me good advice. And I think that, you know, her bringing me up within the United Methodist Church, I think that's been, you know, very influential on my life, you know, because here I am.
And similar to that, has there been an event or a world situation that has just really been so memorable to you, or maybe changed your philosophies?
I would say that would be the earthquake in China, because I was there in the province. We were 2 hours away from the epicenter of the earthquake when it happened.
Still close.
And that was close. And I was on the first floor of an apartment building, and I just remember that I just heard this crash, and I thought, oh, there's this big crash, like an explosion, and I thought, oh, it's demolition's going on someplace a couple blocks away. And then the building shook, and I thought, oh, wow, that's a big explosion. I wonder what the gas explosion? I thought it was a gas explosion. And then the shaking just wouldn't stop. And it started, and this is what everyone says. It was an earthquake that very different than any other, because most earthquakes, they shake and then they stop. And this one just shook and continued to get more violent as it went onward. And at that point, you know, after about 10 seconds into it, I was like, this is an earthquake. So I got under the table like you're supposed to. But it continued to get even worse. So then I got scared, and then I thought, well, if I stay under here and the building collapses around me, I'm going to be stuck under here. And then dumb me. So I decided, oh, well, I better get out of the building. So then I left the building. Thank goodness that we weren't closer, because I would have been gone by then. And then I left the building, and then at that point, everything was chaos, and people were racing outside, and people were on their cell phones calling others and so forth. But this event changed the way that Chinese people viewed one another. They began to have a more Christian understanding of what it is to love one another and reach out and help one another. And before, all Chinese people cared about were my family, my immediate family. And after the earthquake, everyone changed. Everyone started to realize that there are people who are worse off than I am, and we must help them. I have never seen an entire country change basically overnight into a country of service, and I need to be aware of others and not myself. And that actually, and another interesting thing that happened is that the government, for the very first time, decided that they would have a commemoration service for these people who had died. And a week later, we had a 3 minutes of silence moment where everyone in the whole country was supposed to gather in some place and remain silent for 3 minutes. And I went to the college campus of this big university, and we all stood at the flagpole, and we all waited. And when the moment came, the sirens went off to tell us that this is the moment that this happened a week ago. And we were silent for 3 minutes. And as a Christian, that's prayer, folks. We all sat around and we held each other. Some people held each other. Some people cried. Some people held hands. And we remembered these people who had died. And we also remembered those who had survived, and we thought about them and sent them many good wishes. And I'm like, you know, yeah, this is a Christian moment. And since then, the government has done that several times for tragic events. How interesting is that?
That is kind of rare.
That's very rare. So I felt very privileged and honored that I could actually be a part of that. And it was very moving. And it has touched many lives. And students now believe that they need to think about other people and not just themselves all the time. So I
didn't ask you, but you mentioned about the earthquake. Do you live in a second floor unit, a fifth floor, walk up, elevator?
Well, right now I live in another city that and I live in a third floor. I live on the third floor. We don't have elevators beyond 6 floors and under, no elevators. If you're over 6 floors, we have elevators. And yeah, walking, yeah. So I'm happy to be on the 3rd floor. I don't want to be any higher than that. Ugh.
Honey, we've all got so many conveniences and modern things around us. And you're really away from some of these, but is there something you can say, I just could not live without that?
Oh my gosh. I don't think so. I mean, if you want to go for food, I love bagels. I love bagels and cream cheese, but if I want bagels and cream cheese, I can go to the capital city and I can find it. So to be honest, there's really nothing that, I mean, now in China we have electricity, we have microwaves, we have refrigerators, we have television, we have everything. We have excellent transportation. I mean, 23 years ago, no, that was very different. But now there's actually nothing.
I think you kind of touched on this, but you live in another country most of the time, and you're trying to tell someone about Marshall. They say, where is that? What's that all about? What would you tell them about Marshall? It might be an interesting place to visit.
Well, I tell them that most of the students who ask, I say, you know, where do you live? Do you live in New York? You know, they heard of those places. I said, well, I live in a small town. It's about 3,000. Well, now it's 4,000 people. And it's like a village. And I said, and we all know each other. And they're like, oh. And I said, and we have special events. You know, for example, I talk about our band concert. That's very special on Friday evening. And, you know, students who want to visit me, I really would love them to come here. And I actually have a very good Chinese friend who is going to school at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. And I'm hoping that he can come and visit my little town, Marshall. So then I will show him around, and we will go to the Gaslights Art Gallery, and I hope if he comes in the summer, we'll go to the band concert, and maybe we will, you know, just drive around and visit some places and just give him a little understanding about what it's like in a small town. And the first thing most people say is that, where are the people? You know, because the streets are pretty empty. Unless it's a big event, but...
Well, Connie, this has been a delightful interview.
Yes,
I really
Damien,
appreciate you taking the time out of your visiting schedule to do this.
Thank you.
And I'm sure many, many people will enjoy reading this, maybe not today or tomorrow, but in the future too.
In the future, and see how China has changed.
Yes.
You know, if you listen to this after 10 years, you're going to be kind of surprised.
And that's why I've tried to ask you some of the questions, especially about the education field, since that's what you're in.
Yeah, see how it's changed.
That's really, really an important part of your life. Mm-hmm. And it's just been so great. I want to thank you very sincerely.
Yeah,
and we appreciate that for you being part of our oral history project.
Thank you, Damien. I had a good time. Be interesting for me to listen to that too in another 10 years.